name is Tom Cantone. I'm a member of Reveille, United Methodist Church, and I'm here this evening with our current pastor, senior pastor, Doug Forrester, and our new senior pastor, Peter Moon. You all were very excellent in sending in questions for this event tonight, and so I'm going to ask mostly the questions that you've asked of our new pastor, and we'll see how it goes. Hello, Doug. Hello, Peter.
Good to be with you.
Good to be with you as well. So the first topic of conversation is really about your call to ministry, and maybe you can tell us a bit about your call.
Thanks, Tom. I really appreciate the opportunity to meet with you all and to be with you all here tonight. And as I answer these questions, the words of my wife before I left are echoing in the back of my mind as she said to me, you don't have to preach a sermon on every question. So that's a very long question with a long answer, but let me see if I can bring that down. So I was, before I came into the ministry, you might have heard my story. I used to fly for the Navy and spent a whole lot of time at sea, a whole lot of time living a life that, as I say, was addicted to adventure and adrenaline. And I have found that times at sea over history have been a time where God speaks to people, and that was the case with me. There was a season at sea when I was deployed, and when things kind of slowed down, and I started asking some deeper questions that I really didn't have answers to. And I hadn't been back to church for a while, and as a result, I sort of made a commitment that when I got back to church, from sea, that deployment, I was going to pursue my faith in a more deliberate way. And I ended up at a chapel in Whidbey Island, Washington, north of Seattle. And while I was there, I went to the service, and I didn't think much of the service. I was wondering why I was there, and then I was walking out of this big Navy chapel, and this guy came up to me, and I never met him before. He invited me to a Bible study. And because of all the work God had done for 9 months at sea in my life, I said yes. I would have normally never said yes. And I ended up in that Bible study for 2 years. And that was a transformational experience for me. It literally changed my life and put me on this place where I am now, where I moved off of a very active pursuing a Navy career to answering a call to ministry where God called me to the United Methodist Church. There's been a lot of water under the bridge since then, and a lot more details to that story, but in all of that, I have really found, and we may talk more about this, but I really found the power of small groups and how they can change a life, because they really changed mine.
Thank you. That's a great story and a great history. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about. We know that you're the district superintendent now. Maybe give us just a little bit of background before that. Talk about where you've been and what you've done in the ministry.
So I went to Union Theological Seminary, now it's Union Presbyterian Seminary, and I graduated from that a number of years ago. And then I initially served churches largely in the Richmond area. I served 2 small churches, my first appointment right on Staples Mill Road in Richmond. Then I went from there to be the associate pastor at Fairfax United Methodist Church up in Northern Virginia. I was there for 4 years. And then I was called to be the senior pastor at Farmville Church out there in Farmville, Virginia, and then moved from there to be the senior pastor at Woodlake right here in Richmond, and I served there for 13 years. And before Bishop Cho invited me to come on to the cabinet, it's one of those things I never thought I'd be a district superintendent. I always said I would never be a district superintendent. But when Bishop Cho would say, I've prayed about this, it's kind of hard to say no to him. And so I've been serving as DS for the last 5 years when the call came to come here.
Excellent, thank you. Just one follow-up on that. So why would you have said that you never want to be superintendent?
You will find that my passion is for the local church. In my heart, I'm a local church pastor. I have a passion for renewal, and I love preaching. I love leading worship. I love working. I've had a lot of time working with a large church. I love the dynamics in that. I love the energy, the opportunity. I love what you can do in a local church. And a lot of my focus, although I would never, the last 5 years have been some of the greatest learning opportunities of my life. I've learned so much and grown so much. But I really do have a passion and a heart for the local church.
Fantastic, thank you. But you have some relationship with Reveille as well. You want to tell us about that?
Well, sure, and I'm going to say more about that as the weeks and months unfold. When I was here in Richmond going to seminary, I was still a flight instructor in Oceana, Virginia Beach, and so I would spend a number of weekends flying down to Virginia Beach when my wife Lynn was up here with our first child, Lauren, and she was just a baby, and she called me when I was down at Virginia Beach one day, and she said, "Pete, I need to tell you, I have found our church," and I'm quoting her exactly on that. And when I came back, we came to Reveille, we joined Reveille. I was here when Bishop Usler was the pastor. He baptized our daughter Lauren, since then I've been able to be here on a lot of times when you have had new pastors. I was here when Richard Warden was a pastor, and his first Sunday I was here with Jim Nolan's first Sunday. I was at Woodlake, and Lynn said, we just wanted to hear some traditional music, and she didn't hear an organ, so we came, and it just happened to be Jim Nolan's first Sunday. And in addition, I have had numerous conversations with Ray Chamberlain over the years. In fact, I was just walking into this interview now, and I had an email from him just congratulating me on coming to Reveille, and he telling me how special this church was. He's just been an encouraging soul to me for many years. Stories will go on, but that's a few of them.
Thank you. The clergy that we have here now, I mean, you know them fairly well as the superintendent. Maybe you can tell us, and when you were attending here, when Lynn gave you the call to come to Reveille as a member, what names stand out, or what would stand out in our history?
Well, I'll tell you what, Ed Walker was the associate pastor, and he was my mentor in coming into the ministry. And so I was just taking a tour around a month or so ago at the Reveille house, and I walked into Kelly's office, and I remembered that it was right there at that desk that Ed and I had gone into the basics of ministry this is a lot of years ago. So Ed was very special. Bishop Usler has, over the years, just been such an interesting, encouraging, inspirational person for me. And I still remember just sitting in that pew being transfixed while he was preaching in all those years. And meeting a number of other folks over the years. Beth Downs, who has been a part of Reveille Church for many years. She has been such a wonderful friend and mentor in many ways.
Thank you. A few other personal questions about your life, your family. What do you do? What do you read, and what do you do to relax when you're not in church preaching or at?
Sure. My wife and I, and along with our kids, we have 5 children, and we'll probably talk a little bit more about that. But Lynn and I are pretty active. We enjoy running, we enjoy cycling, enjoy hiking, love to get outdoors and exercise. We a couple years ago ran a marathon together. I don't think I'm doing that one again, but it was a great time, a great experience. I do obviously a lot of theological reading, but I also am an avid reader of history. One of my favorite authors is Ron Chernow, and his works. I've just read his book on Grant and was just inspired by that. And a number of other historical readings too. But I also I really enjoy my spare time working with my hands. I'm an amateur carpenter. I love to do lots of projects around the house and building a deck or whatever it takes. Lynn and I, we bought a house that needed some refurbishing, and we've been working on that quite a bit. Just did a bathroom in there. But one of my biggest hobbies is I love to fix old cars. I'm one of those guys who loves to find a car for a couple $100 on Facebook or Craigslist and buy it for nothing and then do some work and get it running again. In fact, you'll meet my truck. My truck's name is Nicodemus. And it's named Nicodemus because nobody ever believed it could be born again. And so we bought that truck for nothing and fixed it up. It's running great. And but I have enjoyed fixing up old cars and reselling them. I try and resell them. I usually end up giving them to my kids. But I would have a lot more cars in the driveway were it not for my wife, who has put a foot down.
Okay, I understand that. So what's your latest woodworking project?
We just put some floors in our house. And we just redid a bathroom. And my biggest one was we put a deck in the house. We built a big deck in the back. And I've also done some furniture work, built some chests, built a bed over the years. I also like to make wooden pins, just a little minor hobby there, but just whatever comes along.
Excellent. By the way, I'm also a one and done marathoner, so I understand.
Been there, done it, got the t-shirt literally.
So again, these questions are coming from the congregation, so I'm just passing them along here.
There you go.
Conduit. But do you have any now current or past pets?
Oh my gosh. Yes, we had 5 kids in 7 years, so we have a whole lot of children. And for years we have had many animals in the house. We've had frogs, we've had hamsters, we've had parakeets, and we've had, you name it, we've had it. And but we have all our kids have dogs. And we have a dog at home, his name's Simba. Wonderful dog, and but when we get together in a reunion, all our kids bring their dogs, and we'll have 7, 8 dogs there around, and they're all big, well, mostly big dogs. So we're a family who loves dogs and loves pets. I think you all just had a blessing to animals here, if I'm not mistaken. So sorry we missed that.
So 5 children. Do you have any? We have, as you know, a very vibrant youth program here, and for children and for middle school and high school students as well. And so, what do you have as suggestions in terms of raising teenagers?
Oh man, it's just a blur. We had so many children so fast, and it's hard to even remember the details of those days. But when they were all teenagers, we had a saying that we would often put out that our role is to keep our teenagers busy, tired, and broke. And we did that, but we also found out that as parents of teenagers, we were busy, tired, and broke. But we endured those days, and we're folks who really think sometimes we are too active as a population now. We're too engaged. We're committed to too many things. But I think in those teenage years, we kept our children pretty busy and active, and found that to be a fruitful time. But really loved the teenage years and the young adult years. We have all our children are young adults now, and they're all married. And we have
how old? What's the range now?
Our youngest is 23, and our oldest is 31. So we have 3 grandchildren, 1 on the way. We're all getting together this weekend at the beach, and just one of the things you'll hear about us is how much we love family, how much we love getting together, and how important that is to us. And have many stories about that.
Great. Switching over to a little bit more substantive theological type of matters. Do you have some examples of some of the most meaningful moments you've had in your ministry? I know you told us about your call, which was very meaningful. What about during preaching?
So I got my doctorate in ministry at Western Seminary a good while ago, and specialized in church revival and church renewal. Did some historical study, did some other studies. That was formational for me. When I think about how does a church come to life, what are the dynamics of that? That has formed me over the years in the way I think about preaching and leadership and small group study and prayer. And I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about that. In addition, I have participated in a number of mission trips over the years. Probably the most foundational trips were to Cuba. I've taken several trips to Cuba, several trips to Africa. But in Cuba, I just found this spiritual vibrancy that is just contagious and still remains with me to this day. In my trips to Africa, I had the opportunity to participate in mission in the poorest country in the world, Sierra Leone. And right after all the violence and the wars of that season, and really came to understand the reality and hurt of the world that has influenced me to this day. In addition, I have, you'll learn from me, I have a real desire and passion to address the racism in our community. And a lot of that comes from the events of several years ago in Charlottesville, and a week or two later when it was here in Richmond. I'm not a person who generally participates in social marches and protests. That's just not who I am. But I really found that I was called to be a part of that work in Richmond to address the post-Charlottesville event. And so I participated in that march and that walk. And I will tell you, it was a profound experience for me, not to just speak about racism, but to walk with people who had experienced it and to just quietly listen to their stories. And it's given me a heart and a desire, especially in the RVA community, to address the racism that is here, and for the church to be a part of that. And there's a whole lot more that I go on, but I'll hold on.
Well, as you know, we have a very solid relationship with the Swansboro neighborhood and with Koinonia Church and Love Center of Unity. Do you have any ideas or thoughts about how we can enhance those relationships? I'm probably talking post-coronavirus, but...
Absolutely. And let me just say, I think one of the things I can do is recognize what incredible work you are doing now. And just let me tell you a story. My wife is a physical therapist, and she works with a number of folks. And one of the persons she works with attends one of the churches that Reveille serves. So my wife happened to mention to her, not knowing she attended there, that I was going to be coming to Reveille. And her eyes brightened up, and she said, and I think I'll quote her exactly, she said, "Oh, Reveille is a great church." And I thought, that's just incredible. What a great advertisement for the work you all are doing.
So Peter, describe for us an ideal church worship service or worship day.
Wow. Well, that's a hard one. But I'll start off with a couple of things. I think you'll come to know that as we craft worship, there's a couple of values that are important to me and are important to Doug and important to any large church leadership leader. But one of those is simply excellence. Most of us have learned, especially in large churches, that you have to have a high-quality, excellent worship service that meets some expectations of folks who attend our churches. They may forgive you 1 week, maybe 2, but they're not going to forgive you 3, especially visitors at a large church. That has been my experience. So excellence is required, but excellence alone, it's not all that is needed. It's also my goal to make sure that we have engagement. In other words, we're not just a performance, we're not just producing excellence, but we are incorporating the congregation in a way that is moving for them. But in all of that, despite our best efforts, ultimately, great worship is a result of God's grace and the Spirit moving. And so, to answer your question, when all those three things come together, you have excellence, you have engagement, you have the Spirit moving, that's what we're seeking. We can do some great planning. We work hard at planning outstanding worship. We think about transitions. We think about announcements. We think about how things fit together. We try to avoid those speed bumps in worship. We'll get things moving and then something happens and you have to start all over again. We try to avoid all those. But in the end, my prayer is that when people come into worship, they actually experience not just excellence, but the reality of a living God who offers us grace and hope that is relevant and moves us to the next place. Don't always get there, but by God's grace, we pray for it.
It seems like over the past several years, churches generally in the Richmond area have been losing attendees, congregants, and often to what I would call pop-up churches or heavily praise worship type churches, probably attracting the younger congregants. Do you have any strategies or anything that you would suggest or hope to? What's your response to that?
Well, I would say after leading Woodlake for 13 years, and especially in the last 5 years, we've been working with 66 churches in the district. I would simply say church is really hard. It's really hard, and not just for mainline, but for, as you referred, pop-up churches or non-denominational churches. And so I think you have to recognize that challenge. We're dealing with an increasing unchurched, the world of nuns and nuns. We are addressing, when we have young families, we're addressing families with multiple commitments who have multiple options and just aren't coming as often. We're an increasingly older congregation, denomination, so we have more and more deaths. So our worship attendance goes down largely because we have lost our senior saints and loved ones. So all that is a big factor in the dynamics and demographics of why we're here. I can promise you I have no silver bullet. If I did, I wish I did. But I do know that profoundly that despite the changing demographics and the growing unchurched populations, I believe every single person still needs Jesus. And every single person, especially today, needs hope. And one of the great things about our Wesleyan heritage is that we believe in grace. And grace works. Grace works in this place where we are now. So the hope lies for us not just in having great programs, even though those are important. I think the hope lies in our Christology, in our theology, and in our profound Wesleyan understanding of grace. And I think we put the pedal down on that. And my prayer is that will work even in the challenges we have today.
What types of things or what actions would you suggest to continue to keep Reveille as a welcoming church?
I'll tell you what, a couple things. I think, again, I'm pretty convinced that Reveille is a welcoming church. And I want to celebrate all the incredible things, statements, other things that Reveille is, hard work Reveille has done to be where it is. And any church needs to continually think about how we are welcoming. And by that I mean not just in our statements or in our mission statement, but what we actually do when we get new people in the church. It is my belief that visitors are increasingly rare. And when you have a visitor in your church, you need to really make sure that person is welcome, not in a way that is obnoxious or overwhelming or over the top, but know that they are loved and welcomed. And that means how we're thinking about how we greet them in the parking lot, how we receive them in the narthex. One of my policies over the years has always been to visit with folks before the service starts. I know we may have some challenges with timing and Reveille, I understand all that. But I've always said to ushers, no matter what, no matter who I'm talking to, if we have a visitor, interrupt me and pull me to that person, because I want to greet visitors personally. Make sure they know that they are welcomed here. So all that is kind of a way to say that I think it's important to make good statements and mission statements, but more important that we actually welcome physically all of us, not just pastoral and staff.
Scripture. How would you describe, or how do you read Scripture, and what approach to studying the Bible?
The scriptures have changed my life. And my life changed when I realized that there's a way of living, of love and grace that's offered in the scriptures, and I was not quite there. And when I realized that tension, God's grace came to work in my life and made changes in me. So as a result, you'll find in me an avid love for scripture, not just because of its wonder, but also because of the power that is inherent in the words, as the Spirit works through those words of Scripture. So when I read Scripture, I read for preaching, I read for teaching, I have all that academic work, but I also read so that I can know who God is in a deeper way. One of my profound beliefs is that when you and I come to know God in a deeper way, we are changed. As we learn of God's character, that learning, that knowledge, transforms us by God's grace. And so I think reading Scripture is not just for academic knowledge, even though that's a good thing. It is to know the character of God that will transform me and as a result make a difference in others. I'm a person who, I'm a Methodist, Wesleyan, John Wesley kind of guy who spends a lot of time in prayer and study. One of my disciplines is every day. Not always an hour, but sometimes pretty close. I open the scriptures, I read, I study, I meditate, and I pray. But when I read the scriptures, what I find is a God who is right here. A God who is present and is living and vibrant and available. That's a God who I hope and pray with all humility I can offer.
Thank you. We're in a very strange time right now. 2020 is transforming a lot of different things, a lot of people's lives, their work, if they haven't. You're becoming the lead pastor of a large church here in Richmond, Reveille. And what do you think? What are your challenges in this coronavirus era?
Where do I start? I mean, that's a challenge in many ways. Oh my goodness. We're just off the map, off the page. And I was trained as an engineer, aeronautical engineer in school, and we used to always have multiple equations with multiple variables. Those were always the hardest. And that's where we are. We're dealing with multiple variables. We don't know time. We don't know timetable. I'm somebody who likes to make plans. I like to put out dates. I like to think about dates, organize around dates. We don't have dates. And I think that's hard on Reveille Church. It's hard on all churches. It's hard on us. So part of what we're going to have to do at some point is sometimes the best we can do is to make a plan to make a plan. But I do think that we will get out of this in some way, some shape, some form. And I do think also what I've been telling every church in the Richmond district is to make sure we are stewarding this time of the pandemic. This is a time where if we need to make changes, there'll be a possibility to make changes. If we need to really take out some learnings, this is going to be a high learning time. This is not a time just to hunker down and endure. And folks who are a lot smarter than me will say that this is not just a interruption, this is a disruption. A lot of folks believe we're just going to come back to business as usual, and that very likely will not be the case. We're going to come back to a different thing. And this is the time to prayerfully discern what are we going to come back to. So there's already been a lot of work done on that at Reveille Church, and Doug's done some work on that. And I'm going to try to catch the coattails on that, but there's going to be some work to do.
A little bit lighter note. How and where did you celebrate Easter this year?
It's killing me. Sitting there at Easter has just been such a big day, and I celebrated it watching a worship service in my living room with my wife and my dog. And it was a wonderful service. It was on TV. It was we had bunches of services all through the Richmond district that I was trying to keep track of. But right there watching TV,
As many people were in the Richmond area.
Exactly.
Reveille services were broadcast. It was as good as it could be.
It was, and let me tell you, I just felt odd. As somebody who's worked our way, Doug knows this, has worked our way to Easter for 30 years, and you're sitting there in your house on Easter morning, and I was kind of walking around the house like, what do I do? Because it was just bizarre. It's a weird time. So let me just say how excited I am to become a Reveille Church, and how special it is, and how humbling it is. Reveille Church has such a history, and such a robust history, and I'm humbled by the opportunities and the resource, and I snuck in a couple days ago. I snuck in the church and climbed up that pulpit. I've never been in that pulpit before, and and as you walk up those steps, it's humbling to think of all the other people that have been there before me, and so I'm coming with a good bit of humility, but also passion and excitement. But the other thing I'd like to say is I have been praying every day about this move and this transition to Reveille. And every time I pray, I get this feeling of hope and possibility and new things. I really think Reveille has such an incredible history, and it's done so much for the city of Richmond, the community in the years. I am convinced in my prayer time that that's going to continue, and perhaps by God's grace, even greater things that can come through. Every time I pray, I just continue to feel an impression of profound hope for the years to come.
So I wanted to thank everybody for watching this tonight, but before we go, I'd like to know if Peter, if you have any questions for me or for Doug.
Absolutely. I just want to say a word of thanks to Doug. Doug has been a friend of mine for many years, a peer and a guide in so many ways. And I have my admiration for him and his ministry and his leadership here. And I am so excited that he's coming up to the cabinet. I don't know if coming up to the cabinet is the right word, but he is coming to the cabinet, and he is going to be such a profound addition to that. But I appreciate, Doug, you sharing a little bit of your story about how you're making this transition and how that's working for you.
Well, what I can say is this. I have been so blessed throughout my time in ministry. Ever since I left, in fact, the first district superintendent I ever talked to about the sense of call I had to ministry was Ray Chamberlain when he was the Richmond district superintendent. And I remember telling him my story, and he sat there in that office, and I kept hearing him saying to himself the word providence, providence. And it was one of the first times I'd ever spoken to anyone about this sense of a call. And from Ray Chamberlain all the way through, more than a quarter century of ministry, I have always had outstanding district superintendents who have served me, who have enabled me to serve the church, who have served all the churches on their district with great excellence. And I cannot think in my life of a better time for me to respond to an invitation to join a bishop's cabinet than right now. And it's because for the last 5 years I had Pete Moon to watch. And you better believe that ever since Bishop Lewis approached me, I've been watching him even closer than I was before. And then even before Pete was our district superintendent, we had Steve Jones, the district superintendent, and nobody knows Reveille quite like someone who has served as the senior pastor, which of course Steve Jones did. So I can't say it strongly enough, and I would say this even if Pete were not coming to Reveille, but were going to serve an appointment elsewhere, how thankful I am that Pete has been a shepherd for the Richmond district, my hometown, but that he's been a shepherd for me. He has always, even before he became our district superintendent, been someone who could speak the truth in love in a way that I could and would hear. And I just am, so much of what I have done since I've been at Reveille, I owe to the support I've had from my district superintendent, and I just hope that I can bring what Pete has given to me, to the 69 churches in the Roanoke Valley, and I believe that if I can do that, I will be a blessing to those churches and their people. So thank you, Pete.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Pete.
It's great to be here.